A mother and her 3-year-old son were living in a women's shelter. The boy had never seen his father. To him, that man didn't exist. She had made sure of it for 4 years, until that morning. When a man appeared in the alley behind the shelter, he watched her come out the side door, a box in one arm, her son in the other, heavier than she used to be, tired, carrying the weight of a life she had built alone. And he froze, because the woman he had walked away from 4 years ago, with no explanation, no goodbye, was holding a 3-year-old boy. A boy he had never seen. A boy with his exact gray eyes. But the child wasn't the most shocking part. The most shocking part was the reason he had left her, and the reason she had gained the weight, because neither one of them was anything anyone would have guessed. His side door stuck. It always did when the air got cold, and Renata was carrying too much stuff to put any of it down to deal with the door, so she did what she always did, which was hit it with her hip. The lock popped. The door swung. "Mama." "What, baby?" "The box is going down." "I know the box is going down." "Is it going to go on the floor?" "No, it's not going to go on the floor. Why would I let it go on the floor? I've been carrying boxes for 3 years. You think I don't know how to not drop them?" "I don't know." "Well, now you know." He was on her hip, 3 years old, 31 pounds, blue striped shirt that had belonged to somebody else's kid before it belonged to him. She got the box onto the counter in the supply room without dropping it and set him down next to it. He started poking the seam of the packing tape. Don't. I'm just looking." "You're poking with my eyes." "Your eyes don't have little fingers on them." "Mine do." She didn't argue. It was 8:30 on a Tuesday in November. She had slept 5 hours and some change, and there were conversations you could not win, and this was one of them. Patrice was in the office down the hall. Renata could hear her on the phone, doing her phone voice, the one that was 20% slower than her real voice, and that, always for some reason, drifted a little toward a British accent by the end of the call. It had taken Renata 6 months of volunteering here before she'd worked up the nerve to ask about the accent, and Patrice had looked at her with absolute sincerity over her bifocals and said, "What accent?" So that was its own thing. Renata took off her coat. She hung it on the hook. She looked at her kid, and her kid looked back at her with an expression she'd long ago decided, was identical to the expression certain dogs use, when they are plotting against a squirrel. "Juice," he said. "Please." "Please, juice." She got him a juice box from the cooler. She got herself a coffee from the pot that Patrice had made at 5:30, and that now tasted, as it always did, like somebody had put a penny in it. She sat down at the little counter. Her back hurt. Her left shoulder did the thing her left shoulder did, which was clicking when she rotated it, and she rotated it on purpose to make it click because she liked the sound for some reason. It was the kind of thing she used to be embarrassed about when she was 23, and now, at 27, she didn't have the energy to be embarrassed about. That was probably one of the only upsides. At 27, Renata Voss carried the body of a woman who had lived through some real things. Her hips were wider than they had been at 23. Her thighs were strong. Her forearms had the shape of a person who had lifted weight every single day for a long time. Sometimes a child. Sometimes a case of diapers. Sometimes a wheelchair. Up the one stupid step the city had promised to fix for 3 years and had not. Her hair was the color of dark honey where the sun caught it, and the color of a wet tree bark where it didn't. She had 2 coats. Her winter coat had been her mother's. She had not bought new boots in 18 months, and she'd had these resoled twice. None of it was apology. It was just what was. Mama." "What? Can we not go home today?" "We have to go home today. Home is where we go." "I know, saying it would be nice." She looked over at him. He was drinking the juice with both hands, very seriously, in the way he did everything. His hair needed cutting. He had a small scab on his chin from a trip on the sidewalk last week. "It would be nice," she agreed. The truck was at the far end of the alley. Callum Hargrove was standing beside it in a gray coat he'd had in the back of a closet for 4 years, and that he'd pulled out that morning because it was the plainest thing he owned, and because he didn't want to be recognized, and because it turned out that even the people in his life who thought they knew his wardrobe didn't know he had this coat. He had left his driver 2 blocks over. He wasn't carrying anything. He had come to this address for the first time in his life because his accountant, a woman named Thea Halverson, who audited the books of the Hargrove Foundation for Women in Crisis, had flagged an invoice that had been paid twice. $1,800, a boring amount, an amount that normally would have bored him unconscious. Except that the Hargrove Foundation for Women in Crisis had been Miles's idea before it had been anybody's, and Callum did not tolerate other people moving around inside the things Miles had left. So, here he was, in a coat. He watched the woman come out of the side door with a box and a child on her hip. He saw her the way he saw everything, as a list of things. Heavier than she used to be. Longer hair. Thin coat. Boots that had been resoled. She moved like a person who had been doing this exact job in this exact building for long enough that she'd stopped thinking about it. He didn't know her. She laughed. He knew her. It was that quick and that stupid. His knees figured it out before his head did. The rest of her he didn't recognize. The body was different. The hair was different. She looked older in the way people look older when life has worked on them. But the laugh was the same. Low, short, surprised, like she was catching herself in the act of enjoying something. He would have known it underwater. He would have known it in his sleep. He didn't move. He stood there with one hand in his pocket, doing nothing for probably 8 or 9 seconds. He didn't step back. He didn't turn around. His body had gone into the kind of stillness it went into when he was about to have to make a decision in a room full of people who were watching him, except nobody was watching him. He was alone in an alley. His breath came out in a small white cloud, and he watched the cloud go up and disappear, and he did not move. Inside the building, his son was drinking a juice box. He did not know this yet. A pigeon landed on the rim of the dumpster, looked at him, decided he was nothing, and walked along the rim without further interest. He should have turned around. He understood this the way you understand a road sign. There was nothing here he needed. Thea could send someone else. The $1,800 would resolve itself, the way things did, and he would never come back, and he'd put the last 90 seconds out of his mind, and the next 3 years would look like the last 3. He didn't turn around. He walked toward the side door instead. He told himself he was going to the door, because the door was in the direction he'd been planning to walk anyway. He was not going to speak to her. He was going to go in, look at the paperwork, leave. The side door was it was there. He was going in the general direction of it. This was not true. He had not lied to himself in 3 years, and he could taste the lie on his tongue, and he kept walking. Inside, the supply room was about 10 degrees warmer than the alley. It smelled like coffee and cardboard, and the faintest suggestion of lemon cleaner. Also, somewhere down the hall a radio was playing very low, what sounded like a weather report in Spanish. The woman was at the counter with her back to him, unloading cans onto a shelving unit, labels out, 2 cans per second. She was fast. The child was next to her on the counter with his legs kicking. The child saw him first. The child did not do what children usually did when they saw a stranger. He didn't grab his mother. He didn't cry. He didn't even blink particularly hard. He tilted his head. Exactly the way Callum's older cousin Ian used to tilt his head in poker games when he was about to catch you in a bluff. And he narrowed his eyes and he looked at Callum the way you look at a sandwich somebody has handed you before you're sure who made it. Callum stopped. He stopped because the child's eyes were gray. Not blue-gray. Not green-gray. Not the generic gray of babies that would darken by kindergarten. A specific gray. Close to silver in certain light. The gray his grandfather had said came from the sea, which was not an answer, but which was also the only answer the Hargroves had. Miles had had blue eyes. His mother had had brown. His father had had brown. The gray was just his in that family, only his. The child tilted his head further and waited. Callum, who had spent 15 years learning to hold eye contact with men who were deciding whether to kill him, could not hold eye contact with this child. He looked at the floor. There was a small piece of packing tape fuzz stuck to the linoleum. He looked at that. "Hi," he said, not to the floor, but to the child. When he felt he could manage it, the child didn't answer. "What's your name?" The child considered the question with the kind of seriousness that might be applied to, say, a contract. "Nico." "Nico, that's a good name." "I know." Callum was aware somewhere in the back of his head of the machinery of his own mind working on a simple piece of arithmetic. 3 years old, add 9 months, go back to that. And 3 years old was being generous. The kid could be younger, still, anywhere in there. And he stopped doing the arithmetic. He didn't like where it was going. "Are you new?" Nico asked. "Am I what?" "At the shelter, we have new people. Some of them are sad. My mom helps them." Yes, I'm new." Nico nodded with the tidy satisfaction of a small bureaucrat who has correctly processed a form. Then he said, not to Callum exactly, more like he was saying it to himself, checking a thing he'd just noticed. "Your eyes are the same as mine." Callum didn't answer. Renata put the last can on the shelf and turned around. It did not go out of her in a rush. It went in stages. First the overhead light, then the refrigerator hum, then the little yellow glow of the exit sign, until she was just standing in a dark room that a minute ago had been full of ordinary things. She had rehearsed this, as she had rehearsed it probably 100 times, at 3 in the morning with a feverish baby on her shoulder, in the shower, on the bus, in the long checkout lines at the Acme on Delaware Avenue. She'd rehearsed what she would say and what her face would do and where she would put her body so that her kid was behind her and not in front of her. None of the rehearsals had included Callum in a coat she didn't recognize, 3 feet from her son. She crossed the room. She did not run. She walked. She walked at the exact unhurried speed of a person who has just understood that her child is watching her and will model for the entire rest of his life, whatever she does in the next 4 seconds. She walked to the counter. She picked him up. She settled him on her hip. He went into the grooves he'd made on her body over 3 years, and he put his cheek against her collarbone, and he didn't fuss, and she felt the small, warm trust of him settle in, and the feeling passed through her like a hand closing around her throat. Because it was what proved she was still a mother and still functional. She turned to face Callum. He had aged, not in any one place. He had just acquired, around his eyes, the particular stillness of a man who had stopped expecting anything. And she had seen that stillness start to set in during the last weeks before he left her, and she had always half wondered whether it had finished or whether it had cracked somewhere along the way and let him out. It had finished. She could see that. "Hello, Renata," he said. "You need to leave." She said it quietly. She said it without any of the feelings she was feeling. She said it the way a person says the building is on fire to a room full of strangers, as a simple, actionable fact, offered once. His jaw moved. That was the only thing he did. "Renata, you need to leave. I didn't know. I'm not interested in what you didn't know." Nico had gone still against her. He always did. He could read her body better than he could read most words. Oh, she felt him counting her heartbeats through her shirt, the way he'd done since he was a baby. Callum looked at her. Then, briefly, at the child. Then, back at her face, and something that was almost nothing crossed his, and she watched him make the decision she had been praying for 4 years, that he would not ever have to make. He nodded. "Once. I'll leave." He didn't say goodbye. He didn't ask to see the kid again. He didn't ask for her number, or her last name, or the year her son had been born. She could see him doing that math behind his eyes, too, and she could see the answer arriving, and she could see him visibly, with the first visible effort she had ever seen cross his face. Choosing not to say anything he hadn't earned the right to say, he turned. He walked to the side door. Then he put his gloved hand on it, and he paused for a second. I left. The door stuck in the cold, the way it always did, and he closed it gently. She recorded the gentleness. He had always closed doors gently. It was one of the few things about him that had not turned out to be a version of something else. "Mama," Nico said after a while. "Who was that?" "A stranger, baby." He had my eyes. A lot of people have gray eyes. No, they don't. She kissed the top of his head, and she held him for longer than he wanted to be held, and he let her because he was 3 years old, and the world had taught him already that his mom sometimes needed to hold him more than he needed to be held. Callum made it to the end of the alley before he stopped. Money put a hand flat against the brick of the building next door and leaned forward and breathed. Not because he was having some kind of attack. He just had to breathe in a deliberate way for a minute. He didn't cry. He had not cried at Miles's funeral, and he had not cried at his mother's, and he wasn't going to start now, in an alley, at 10 in the morning on a weekday. But he stood with one hand on a wall, and he breathed, and he let a specific fact sit at the front of his head for a minute. He had a son. The fact sat there. It was not a thought. It was just there. He had a kid named Nico, who had his eyes. He had a kid who was 3. He had a kid who sat on a counter in a shelter drinking a juice box. He had a kid, and the mother of that kid had raised him by herself in the margin of her own exhaustion. And Callum had spent the last 4 years running an empire he had built on top of his dead brother like a tomb. When he had ended it with her 4 years ago, he had believed, or he had told himself, that it was a kindness. He remembered the sentence he'd used, "I can't be what you need me to be." He remembered her face doing nothing because she'd had the kind of self-control at 23 that some people never develop, and she had looked at him for a long second, and she had said, "All right," and she had picked up her bag from the chair, and she had walked out. He had watched her go, because he had loved her enough, he had told himself, to close a door between her and the thing he was becoming. 3 months later, she had found out she was pregnant. She had not told him. She had not told him because he had already, in her account of things, chosen his empire over her, and a child was one more reason for a man to make the same choice with more brutality the second time. She had been right. He took his hand off the brick. He walked to the car. He didn't talk to the driver the whole way home. He went up to his apartment. He stood in front of the window that looked out over the river, and he watched the water move under the bridge for a long time without turning on any lights. Behind him, on the desk, the invoice for $1,800 sat in a folder he was no longer interested in. In his head there was a small, gray-eyed boy with his head tilted at about 15 degrees, saying, "Your eyes are the same as mine." His forehead went against the glass at some point. He didn't remember deciding to do it. It was very cold. He stayed there. Renata did not tell Sloan for 4 days. She did not tell her because Sloan would be right, and she was not ready yet to hear what Sloan would be right about. She also did not tell her because Sloan had been the one in the hallway outside the bathroom the night Renata had taken the test, and Sloan had been the one who had driven her to the anatomy scan, and Sloan had been the one who had held her hair back at the hospital at 31 weeks when her blood pressure had spiked, and they had almost lost him, and Sloan had earned through all of that the right to a certain tone of voice whenever Callum Hargrove's name came up, and Renata did not have the energy for that tone of voice on a Thursday night. On the 4th day, Sloan came over with a bottle of wine and a pizza and took one look at her face. "Who died?" "And if nobody died, who did you see?" "Nothing happened." "You have your face." "What face?" "Your face. The face you had when the orthodontist said the braces would be $4,000. The face you had when the landlord raised the rent. The face you had when... Sloan, when you saw him 4 years ago across the restaurant, the last time, that face." Renata poured herself a glass of wine. Slowly, Sloan watched her do it slowly. "He came to the shelter," Renata said. Sloan didn't say anything for a moment. In the living room, Nico was stacking wooden blocks into a tower that he had every intention of knocking down, with the patient viciousness of a small king. Sloan turned her head so she could watch him while she asked the next question. "On purpose?" "No, I don't think so. And there's an invoice thing." "He came about an invoice." "Yeah." "He didn't know you were there." "No." "And he saw him." "Yeah." Sloan closed her eyes. She did it fast and without drama, the way she did when she was deciding not to say the first 3 things that came to mind. When she opened them again, she looked at Renata with the directness of her admiration, who had been her friend since the 6th grade and who was not in the habit of being gentle. What did he do? He left. I told him to leave and he left. That's it. That's it. Sloan drank some wine. She set the glass down. She looked at Nico, who had gotten to the knocking down phase of the block project, which he was now executing with focus. Sloan made the face she made when she was about to not say what she actually thought. Okay, she said. What do you want to do? Nothing. Ren. I want to do nothing, Sloan. I want to do absolutely nothing. I want him to have seen what he saw and go back to wherever he lives and never come near this apartment or my son or my shelter. And I want the next 30 years of my life to look like the last 3.5. Because the last 3.5 have been hard, but they have been mine, and mine is better than his. Okay, okay, okay. Sloan took a long drink. And I'm not going to say, I told you so. I'm not going to say he is a coward. I'm going to say one thing, and then I'm going to leave it alone for tonight and eat my pizza and hang out with my godson. Say it. A man who leaves when you tell him to leave, the first time isn't always the same man who stays gone. He could come back. You should know what you want to do if he does. He won't. He will. Sloan. He looked at Nico. He'll come back. I'm not saying he'll come back tomorrow. I'm saying it's coming. That's all I'm saying. I'm done. She was done. She picked up a piece of pizza and she ate it, staring at Nico through the doorway like she was trying to memorize the shape of his head. Renata sat with her hands around her wine glass, and she thought about a lot of things and she didn't say any of them. She cried a little. Later, after Sloan had gone. She did it fast. She was not a person who cried over Callum Hargrove, not anymore. She had not cried over him in 3 years. But she sat on the edge of the tub while Nico was asleep in the other room, and she let her face do its thing for about 4 minutes, and then she washed it, and she brushed her teeth, and she went to bed. Callum didn't come back for 11 days. He didn't come back because he was trying to figure out what kind of man he was going to be about it. He was aware, with a specificity that shamed him, that he was one decision away from being the kind of man his father had been, or his uncle, or any of the men he had spent his life putting distance between himself and. There was a version of love that was ownership. There was a version of showing up that was siege. And there was a version of the next 20 years in which he took the fact of his son and used it quietly and smartly as a lever to get back into the life of a woman who had already told him he was not welcome there, and he understood that he was capable of that version, and he was scared of it. So he did not go back. He did other things instead. He had Harlan, his accountant, his regular accountant, not the foundation's, run the math on his estate. He signed 3 new beneficiary documents. He wrote out in his own handwriting an address in the north end of the city. Harlan, who had been his guy for 22 years and was the only person Callum had ever let into his actual financial life, looked at the handwritten line and pushed it back across the desk. Cal. What? You want to tell me what this is? No. All right. It's nothing illegal, Harlan. I didn't think it was illegal. I thought it was a mistake. But you don't make mistakes in this kind of handwriting, so I figured not. Don't tell anybody. I wasn't planning on it. Harlan put the paperwork away. Callum paid for the coffee. They didn't talk about anything for a minute. Harlan had known Miles. Harlan had been the one at Callum's kitchen table at 3 in the morning. The night Miles was killed, making Callum drink water, he was allowed longer silences than anybody else was. Is she all right? Harlan said finally. I don't know. The kid. I don't know. All right. That was all they said about it. He also went to the cemetery once, on the 7th night. He had not gone often. He did not believe in cemeteries as a practice, but he drove out there in the rain, and he stood at Miles's headstone for a long time, and he did not speak, because what he had to say to a dead man was not a thing a man could say out loud, and also because he realized standing there, what he had been calling grief for 3 years had been something else. Grief was a reasonable thing. What he had been doing was hiding inside grief. He had been using it as a room to sit inside. He had stopped being a person and had called that a tribute. His brother would have hated it. It rained through his coat. He got back in the car, soaked. He drove home. On the 11th day, he called the shelter and asked for Patrice. He used the voice he used with strangers, which was lower than his real voice. and which his sister used to say made him sound like the narrator of a nature documentary. He asked Patrice, as a donor with no particular stake in the building, what the shelter was most in need of. Patrice gave him a list, 6 items. He wrote them down. "I can have a truck at your loading dock on Tuesday at 9, he said. "That's very generous." "It's not generous, it's overdue." There was a small silence on the other end of the phone. Callum understood the silence. He understood that Patrice, who was not stupid, had filed his voice away to check against something later. He did not correct the silence. 9 o'clock then, Patrice said. She hung up. Callum put the phone down on the kitchen counter and looked at it for a minute. 5 days to Tuesday. And he also, and this was the thing he could not quite explain to himself afterwards, he went and sat at the coffee shop across the street from the shelter on a Saturday morning. He did not go in expecting to see her. He went in because he wanted to look at the building from the outside, in normal light, on a day when he was not coming in as anything. He wanted to understand what she had been choosing so he could understand what he had lost. That was the thought he had told himself. It probably wasn't the whole truth. He was on his second coffee when she came down the sidewalk. She was not going to the shelter. She was going past it. She was alone. She had on the same thin coat and a red knit hat pulled down over her ears. She had a canvas bag slung over one shoulder, and sticking out of the top of the bag was the square corner of what was clearly a stretched canvas. She stopped at the corner to wait for a van. She turned her face up to the sun for a second, the way people do when they have been cold, and there is suddenly a bright patch of warmth, and he watched her profile in the sun, which was tired and soft and unguarded, and he understood that she was going somewhere to paint. He had not known 4 years ago that she painted. He had known she drew. He had known she had been a graphic designer at a firm downtown that did brand identities for restaurants. He had not known she painted, because in the 11 months he had spent with her, he had never once asked her what she did on the Saturdays when he wasn't around. The van passed, she crossed, she walked out of his view. He sat at the window for a long time after she had gone. It was the kind of sitting where nothing happens in your head, and you are still, for some reason, worse for it. When he finally got up, he understood one thing about himself that he had not understood before. He had not left her 4 years ago to protect her. He had left her because he had not had the courage at 32 to be the kind of man she was going to require him to become. Protection had been the story. Fear had been the thing underneath the story. He had called the fear love, and he had gone home. He walked to his car. He sat in the driver's seat for a while and didn't turn the key. The parking lot was half full. A guy 2 spaces over was eating a sandwich in his car with his whole face involved. Callum watched him and thought about nothing, and then, eventually, had started the engine and drove. Tuesday. The truck backed into the alley at 9 on the nose. Callum got out in jeans and a gray Henley and a canvas jacket he had bought that week at a store he had not been inside in 20 years, because nothing he owned was appropriate, and he had understood that showing up in his regular clothes would be a statement he did not have the right to make. He told the driver to wait in the cab. He rolled up the back door of the truck. He began unloading. The first load was diapers, 12 cases, newborn through size 5, on a pallet. He broke the pallet down by hand, which hurt his hands because his hands were the hands of a man who had not lifted anything heavier than a wine glass in a long time. And he carried the cases in through the side door 4 at a time, past the supply room, and past Patrice's office, to the storage closet at the end of the hall. He didn't stop to talk to anybody. He didn't ask for help. He put the boxes on the shelves in rough size order, and he went back out for the next load. Second load. Formula. Infant acetaminophen. Children's vitamins. Electrolyte packets. Band-Aids in 4 sizes, third load. Winter coats. A full-size range. He had called a wholesaler he had not done business with in 10 years, personally, at 7 that morning, to confirm the delivery. It was the coats that brought her out. He was carrying the second box of coats when she came to the side door. She did not open it all the way. She stood in the gap with her shoulder against the frame, in a gray sweater that was too long in the sleeves, and she watched him set the box down. She didn't say anything. Oh, and he didn't say anything either. He turned. He went to the truck. He came back with another box. He set it down. He looked at her briefly and saw that she was watching him and was not going to leave. He went back to the truck. He unloaded the rest of the coats, then socks, then a case of children's books, board books, the thick kind with rounded corners that can survive a toddler. The books had not been on Patrice's list. He had added them because he had noticed in the supply room on the first morning that Nico had not had a book, and he had been thinking about it for 11 days. When the truck was empty, he rolled the back door down. He signaled the driver. The driver pulled away. Callum stood in the alley with his hands in his pockets, not because he wanted to, but because he had agreed with himself before coming that he would not approach the building any further than he had been asked to. Renata was still in the doorway. She watched him for another moment. Then, without stepping outside, without holding the door open for him, she said, "There's coffee in the break room." She went back inside. Callum stood in the alley for about 20 seconds because he understood that what had just happened was not an invitation in any normal sense, and he wanted to be sure about the size of the opening that had been extended to him. Then he crossed the alley, wiped his boots on the metal grate, and went in. She was not in the break room. She was in the supply room, with her back to him, refolding a stack of towels that had not needed refolding. She had left the break room door open on her way past it. The coffee pot was on. There were 2 paper cups beside it. He understood he was supposed to pour one for himself and one for her, and bring hers to the supply room, and that this was the smallest and the largest opening that had ever been offered to him in his life. And he poured the coffee. He brought it. He set hers on the counter near her elbow, close enough that she could reach it, far enough that it was not a gesture of intimacy. He stepped back. She finished the towel. She picked up the cup. She took a sip. She did not look at him. "Nico's with Sloan," she said. "I didn't want him here for this." "I understand." "Do you?" "Yes." A silence. She turned, finally. She put the coffee down. She leaned back against the counter and crossed her arms, and the pose was not defensive exactly, but it was not open either. It was the pose of a person who had arranged her body into a container that would hold, for a fixed period of time, a conversation she had been avoiding for a long time. "I have 4 questions," she said. "I'm going to ask them one at a time. You are going to answer with the shortest true thing you can say. You are not going to elaborate. You are not going to apologize because I don't want your apologies. Clear?" "Yes." "First question, why did you end it?" "Because I was scared." She tilted her head very slightly. He had not given her the answer she was expecting. The answer she was expecting was the one he had given her 4 years ago. "I can't be what you need me to be." The new answer was shorter, and it did not let him off any hook. "Scared of what?" "That Miles dying meant I was going to lose everybody I loved. And you were the person I loved, so I got rid of you before the universe could." She didn't answer right away. "Second question, when you looked at Nico, did you know he was yours?" "Yes." "When?" "The second I saw his eyes." Third question, Mom, did you come back to the shelter today because of him or because of me?" He waited. "I don't know how to answer that honestly," he said. "I came back because I couldn't stay away. I can't separate the 2 of you in my head yet. If I have to pick one, it's you. He exists because of you. He's who he is because of you. If I get to love him at all over the next 40 years, it's going to be because you let me, not because of biology. Any claim I have to him runs through you." Her throat moved. He saw it. She didn't speak for a second. Fourth question. "Yes. What do you want?" He didn't answer fast. He had rehearsed 3 answers on the drive over. He dropped all 3 of them when he heard her voice. "I don't know what I want," he said. "I know what I don't want. I don't want to scare you. I don't want him to grow up with a man who shows up and then leaves. I don't want to be his dad in name only, and I don't want to be his dad at all if you tell me it's not what's best for him. I want to be allowed to be useful to you both, in whatever shape that takes. And I want to understand that it's going to be years, not weeks. And I want every inch of trust to have to be earned. because that's how this should work, and He stopped. He breathed. I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you. No, she said, you don't. I know. She picked up the coffee. She looked at it. She didn't drink. You were already married to your empire, she said, and her voice was flat, not angry, like she was reading off a page she had memorized a long time ago. I was an inconvenience you had already resolved. You said that, 4 years ago. Without saying it, you looked at me like I was a line item, and you closed the page and you walked out of the apartment. I got it. I got it that morning. I got it that afternoon. I got it 3 months later when the test was positive. I got it at 31 weeks on the magnesium drip. I got it when he was colicky and I hadn't slept in 4 days. Every single time it got hard, I got it again. I have not been standing around for the last 3.5 years, wondering whether you should have been there. I have been understanding every day why you were not. Renata, I'm not finished. Okay, I don't want you in my life. The sentence went into him like a thin blade. He absorbed it. He did not move. He had promised himself he would not argue, and he kept the promise. I don't want you in my life, she said. He's slower, and I don't know how to keep you out of his anymore, because he saw you and he's smart, and he's going to ask. I have to figure out what to tell him. And I have to figure out how much of him I am willing to give you before I know whether you can be trusted not to break him. And I have no interest in doing either one of those things fast. I understand. You don't get to know him yet. You don't get to see him. You don't get to send him gifts. You don't get to call. You don't get to show up at this building unless I've asked you to. If you break a single one of those rules, you won't see either one of us again, and I will have a very expensive lawyer make sure of it. Clear? Yes. What I'm willing to give you right now is this. You can email me once a week. Once. You can say anything you want to say. And you can ask anything you want to ask. I'll answer, or I won't. Over time, if I decide I believe you are the man you are today, I will give you more. I'm not promising the day is going to come. I'm telling you that if it does come, it will come slow and on my terms. And the second I feel you trying to speed it up, we are done. Is that acceptable? Yes. Say it as a sentence. It's acceptable. It's more than I expected. It's more than I have the right to. Don't tell me what you have the right to. I decide that. I haven't decided yet. Okay. She drank the coffee, finally. She drank like the conversation had made her thirsty, in a literal way. He watched her and said nothing. When she put the cup back down, it made a small, flat sound on the counter, and he understood the sound to be the end. He said, "Hey, thank you." She didn't say anything. He left through the side door. He came back the next Tuesday. He came back with another truck, smaller this time, because Patrice had sent him a new list. He had decided, without asking anybody, that he was going to show up every Tuesday at 9 for as long as the shelter would take the deliveries. He had called Patrice the night before and told her to expect him regularly, and Patrice, again, not stupid, had said, "All right, Mr. Hargrove," and had hung up. He unloaded the truck. Renata was not there. He understood when he finished that she had arranged not to be there on purpose. He understood she was not going to give him 2 things in a row. She was going to make the rhythm of this new, slow, almost invisible thing clear to him from the start. And the rhythm was, he would give, and she would decide whether to acknowledge it. And if she acknowledged it at all, it would be small. And if she didn't, it would be as if nothing had happened. He didn't mind. He minded a lot of things in his life, but he didn't mind that. He drove home. He sat at his desk. He wrote the first email. 4 sentences. He told her what he had brought. He told her he had not asked Patrice about Nico. He told her he hoped she was sleeping. And he told her he would write again next week. And she did not need to respond. She didn't respond. He wrote again the next week. He wrote about the weather. He wrote about the cemetery, that he had gone, that he had said things to his brother he should have said years ago. He wrote that grief without change was a long form of self-pity, and that he had been practicing self-pity for 3 years, and that he was trying to stop. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not ask for a reply. He closed with his initials and sent it and went to bed. 3 weeks later, she replied. 2 sentences. Nico had asked, she wrote, whether his mom knew the man at the shelter with the gray eyes. She had told him, yes, I used to know him, and it's a long story, and I will tell you some of it someday. She wasn't writing to forgive him. She was writing so that he would understand that the asking was going to keep happening, and that every single answer she gave her son from now on was a door she couldn't unopen. Callum read the email 4 times. He didn't answer that night. He answered 3 days later. He wrote a paragraph about doors. He wrote that he understood that every door she opened with Nico had a cost she was paying and he was not. He wrote that the imbalance was not a thing he could fix with words. He wrote that the only thing he could think to do about it was to be the kind of man whose existence eventually did not require her to keep paying costs. He wrote he did not know how long it would take him to be that man, but that he was starting, and that he was not going to stop. She didn't answer. He kept showing up. Winter. And there was an ice storm on the second Tuesday in January. Half the city shut down. Callum drove the truck himself because his regular driver's wife was in labor, and he would not have asked anyone else to drive in that weather, and he got to the shelter an hour late with the wipers frozen to the glass and his gloves soaked through. He unloaded 3 cases of electric blankets and 2 cases of thermal socks by himself, while the wind came down the alley like a slow knife. He was carrying the last box when the side door opened. Renata was standing there in her thin coat, with her hair loose for once, the strands lifting in the wind. "Come in for a minute," she said. "You're going to freeze." He came in. She didn't take him to the supply room. She took him to the break room. The coffee was on. There were 2 cups already poured. She pointed to the chair across from hers, and he sat. And he didn't take off his jacket because he didn't want to presume. "Take off your jacket. You're dripping on my floor." He took off the jacket. He hung it on the back of the chair. He sat. She slid one of the coffees across the table. He picked it up and his hands shook a little, the way hands shake when they have been cold for too long and are now in the presence of heat, and he was embarrassed about the shaking in a way that surprised him. He had not been embarrassed about anything in a long time. "I got your email," she said. "Which one?" "The one about doors." A pause. "And the 2 after it. And the one about your brother, which I didn't answer, but which I read 3 times. "Okay. I am not ready to let you see Nico." "I know. I don't know when I'll be ready. It might be a long time. It might be never." "I know." She set the coffee down. She looked at him, and for the first time since he had walked back into her life, she looked at him the way she used to. Not warmly, not kindly, but steadily. The way she looked at things she had decided were real. He had not understood until she was looking at him that way again, that he had been going without it. Oh, he didn't move. He didn't want to break it by moving. "I want to tell you something," she said. "And I'm telling you not because you deserve to hear it, but because I need to say it once. Out loud, to the person it's about. You don't get to respond. Clear?" "Yes." "When I was in the hospital at 31 weeks, she said, I thought I was going to lose him. They had me on magnesium. I couldn't feel my legs. The lights were very bright. Sloan was there. At some point a nurse came in for paperwork. She asked me who the father was. I said there wasn't a father. And I realized, saying it, that I had been saying it in different forms, to different people, for 7 months. There was no father, and saying it, this is the part I want you to hear, saying it didn't hurt. I had been waiting for it to hurt. For 7 months I had been waiting, and in the hospital I understood finally that it wasn't going to hurt, because whatever I had loved about you, you had already killed yourself. I didn't lose you in the apartment. I lost you months before. You broke up with a relationship that had been over for a long time, and I just hadn't figured it out yet. And when I did figure it out, on magnesium, in a hospital bed, it stopped hurting me. So do you understand what I'm telling you? Yes. I'm telling you I moved on a long time ago. I'm not sitting in this chair because I'm still in love with you. I am sitting in this chair because my son has your eyes and he is going to ask me about you. And I'm trying to figure out what kind of answer I want to be able to give him, and that is a separate thing from whether I love you, and I need you to understand that those are separate, because if you confuse them, we are going to have a problem. He didn't speak. She had told him not to. He held to it. She watched him hold to it. He saw something in her face soften, maybe a millimeter, as she watched him not argue. It was not forgiveness. It was not even recognition. It was a small, grudging note that he had done in that one moment, the thing she had asked him to do. For a man like him, it was not nothing. "Finish your coffee," she said. "Then you can go." He finished it. He put the jacket back on. He paused at the door. "Renata." "What?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For telling me." She didn't answer. She took the 2 cups to the sink. She didn't turn around when he opened the door, and she didn't turn around when he closed it behind him. He stood in the alley for a minute with his gloves in his hand, and he understood that he had not been forgiven, and he understood that she had given him something else, something smaller than forgiveness and more useful, which was the truth about where she actually stood. He put the gloves back on. He drove home through the ice. Spring came slow that year. By April, the alley had lost its frost. The dumpster smelled different in the warmer air, and the crows had come back. Renata had started leaving the side door propped open in the mornings. Callum kept coming on Tuesdays. He did not miss a week. He came with deliveries. He unloaded them. Sometimes she was there, sometimes not. When she was there, they didn't always talk. And when they talked about the shelter, the families rotating through, the intake coordinator Patrice was trying to hire, the plumbing in the east bathroom that had started to complain. They did not talk about Nico. He never asked. She never offered. It was a shape they had agreed on without ever agreeing on it, and it held. Then, on the last Tuesday in April, she opened the door before he had finished unloading and stood on the threshold and said, "I have a question." "Okay. If I let you meet him, eventually, not soon, not anytime soon, but eventually, how would you introduce yourself?" He set down the box. He thought about it. "As your friend, if you were willing to let me call myself that, which you might not be." "Why not as his dad?" "Because I'm not his dad. A man becomes somebody's dad by doing things. I haven't done any of them." "Would you want to be his dad?" "Yes." Even knowing it might not mean what it usually means. "Yes." She looked at him for a long time. The April light was thin and clean. It fell across her face in a way that made him understand, for the first time in a long time, that she was beautiful. He had always known it as a recorded fact. He had not felt it as a physical thing in the body in almost 4 years. He felt it now. He did nothing with it. He let it pass. He had confused once his feelings about her with his rights regarding her, and he was not going to do it again. "Okay," she said. "Okay. That's all I wanted to ask. I'm not telling you can meet him. I'm not telling you anything about when. I'm telling you I wanted the answer to that question, and now I have it." She stepped back inside. The door drifted partway shut. Then, over her shoulder, half to herself, "He drew a picture of you last week." "What?" But she was already gone, into the supply room. And the side door was already closing the rest of the way, and Callum was standing in the alley with his empty hands and his chest gone a little soft. Because somewhere, in an apartment he had never been in, a 3-year-old boy had sat at a kitchen table and picked up a crayon and had drawn, from memory, a man he'd met for about 90 seconds in a supply room in November. He closed his eyes for a second. A breeze moved through the end of the block. Somewhere down on the avenue, a kid was laughing. A kid who was not Nico, but was a kid laughing in a city on a weekday in the spring. He got in the truck. He did not drive home right away. He drove to the river and he parked, and he sat behind the wheel for a long time, and he thought about a kid drawing a crayon picture of a stranger. And he thought about the mother who had let him do it, and he thought about how mercy almost never looks the way you think it's going to look. Mostly it looks like a door somebody, for their own reasons, has decided not to lock. She did not tell him what she was deciding. She was not deciding. She knew she was moving, in small increments, toward some eventual door she was going to open or not open, and she knew she was not there yet, and she had no interest in telling him anything about the process. She owed him nothing, and the easiest way to keep owing somebody nothing was to keep saying very little, but she noticed things. She noticed he had started wearing work clothes that actually fit him. She noticed his hands had gotten rougher. She noticed that he had learned the names of 3 of the women staying at the shelter. And she noticed he had gained back some of the weight he had lost during the 3 years she hadn't been looking at him. She noticed that the stillness around his eyes, the stillness she had seen in him that first morning, as the stillness of a man who had stopped expecting to be happy, had begun to crack. She noticed he did not ask about Nico. She noticed he did not ask about her. She noticed he wrote to her once a week, and that the emails had gotten longer and harder to read, and that she had started to look forward to them, which was not a thing she had given herself permission to do. She told Sloan about the emails in June. Sloan read 3 of them. Sloan handed the phone back across the kitchen table and didn't say anything for a second. "Well," Sloan said, "don't. I'm not saying anything. Your face is saying things. My face is a free country." Renata laughed. She had not laughed in front of Sloan about Callum Hargrove in 4 years. Sloan heard the laugh and did not comment on it because Sloan was a lot of things, but Sloan was not dumb, and she did not push a person she loved toward a decision they were not ready to make. "What are you going to do?" Sloan said. "I don't know." "Do you want him back?" "No." "Do you want him in Nico's life?" "I don't know." "Do you want him out of your life?" She thought about it. She thought about it the way she thought about every serious thing in her life, which was with her full attention. She looked out the window at the fire escape where a tomato plant she had bought at Home Depot was failing in a pot she had not watered enough. And she thought about a man in work clothes in an alley in April, and a small boy at her kitchen table drawing a stranger from memory. "I want him to keep showing up," she said. "I want to see over time whether he's the guy he's pretending to be. If he is, I want to decide what to do with that information when I have enough of it. If he's not, I want him to stop coming without me having to tell him to." "That's fair. Is it allowed to want that?" "Yeah," Sloan said. "It's allowed." "Okay. And Ren?" "What?" "He's going to keep showing up, for a long time, longer than you think." "I know." Sloan reached across the table and put her hand on Renata's briefly, and took it back. It was the most tender thing Sloan had done in her life up to that point. They both knew it. They both let it pass. Late May. Callum backed the truck into the alley on a Tuesday and found Renata sitting on the low concrete step beside the side door. She had been waiting for him. She didn't get up when he got out. She watched him unload. When the truck was empty and the driver was gone, she gestured at the step next to her, and he came and sat down. She didn't speak for a moment. The alley was full of that particular late afternoon light that shows up for about 10 minutes at a certain time in early summer and makes everything look like a photograph of itself. "He's at Sloan's," she said. "Okay. I'm not ready to let him meet you." "Okay. I want to know if you'd be willing next Saturday to meet me in a park, not with him, just me, for a walk. I want to see if I can be around you for an hour in a public place without my chest getting tight. Now that's what I want to find out. I'm not asking you any questions about the future. I'm not asking you to bring anything or say anything. I'm asking you if you would walk with me in a park for an hour so I can see what my body does about it." Callum didn't answer right away. "Yes," he said. "I'll do that. 9 o'clock, south entrance at Kellner Park. There's a coffee cart. I'm not going to get you a coffee because I don't do that yet. You can get one for yourself." "Okay. If I decide during the hour I don't want to see you again, I'll tell you. If I tell you that, you'll stop coming to the shelter too. You'll stop writing. You'll disappear from this part of the city." "Okay. If I decide I want to see you again, I'll tell you that. I don't know which one I'm going to decide. I want you to know before Saturday that I really don't." "I know you don't." "Yeah." She looked at him. The late light was on the side of her face. He could see the faint lines at the corner of her eye that had not been there 4 years ago, and he understood that he had missed the making of them, and that he was not going to get the years that had made them back, and that this was fine, because the alternative, the version of him who had been around to watch them appear and had ignored them or resented them or not noticed them, was a version of himself he did not want to be. The lines were hers. The years that had made them were hers. He had no claim on any of it. The only thing he might have a claim on, if she let him, was whatever came next. "Okay," she said. Okay. She stood up. She brushed dust off the back of her jeans. She paused with her hand on the door and she didn't turn around. But she said clearly enough. He named the guy in his picture, by the way. Last week, I forgot to tell you. What did he name him? The Gray Man. Callum laughed, a short, surprised laugh that cracked in the middle. He had not known until she said it that he was capable of laughing at anything involving his son. That's a really good name, he said. I know. She went inside. He sat on the step for another minute. The alley was very quiet. A piece of paper moved along the curb by itself, end over end, on some little invisible air current. Above the building, the first bats of the evening were coming out in erratic arcs, feeding on something he couldn't see. And he thought about Saturday. He thought about the park and the coffee cart and the hour Renata was going to give him. Not because he deserved it, not because he had earned it yet, but because she had decided, on her own timeline, for her own reasons, to test a door. He didn't know if the door was going to open. He didn't know if, once opened, it was going to stay open. He knew only that he was going to be at the south entrance at 9 on Saturday, and that he was going to be there every Saturday and every Tuesday after that. For as long as she would let him, with no expectation and no demand, because somewhere in an apartment he had not been in, a small boy with his eyes had drawn a crayon picture of a stranger and given him a name. And because the mother of that boy had climbed out of the worst years of her life without his help and was now cautiously, on her own terms, thinking about whether to look at him again. It wasn't a future. It wasn't a promise. It was a woman alone on a step, telling a man he could come to a park on Saturday to find out what her body did about it. It was enough for Callum Hargrove, who had believed for 3.5 years that grief had finished him. It was more than he had allowed himself to imagine he would be given. He got up off the step. He didn't knock. He didn't call out. He walked down the alley in the warm May evening, with the light going soft behind the buildings. And he did not look back because looking back was a privilege he had not yet earned, and because he had started, finally, to understand the difference between a thing he wanted and a thing he had any right to ask for. Inside, in the supply room, Renata stood by the window with her hands on the sill and watched him go, and did not yet know what she was going to do about Saturday, and did not try to know. She let herself stand there. She let herself watch. She let herself feel, for the first time in almost 4 years, the specific weight of a decision that was entirely hers to make, and she did not hurry it. Above the roofline, the first star of the evening came up over the city. But she didn't wish on it. She had not wished on a star since she was 9. She just noticed that it had come out, and that she had noticed, and that noticing small things again after a long stretch of being too tired to notice anything. It was maybe the beginning of something she was not ready to name. She turned off the light in the supply room. She went to pick up her son.
If Renata's story moved you, if you found yourself rooting for the woman at the window and the boy with the gray eyes and the man who finally understood the difference between wanting something and having the right to ask for it, then do me a favor. Subscribe. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in Renata's place. Would you have let him back in? Would you have made him wait longer? Would you have closed the door for good?